All right, so I'll go ahead and get started by introducing myself. For those who don't know me, my name is Tara Lynn. I've been an artist for about 30 years. I've been a teaching artist about 20 of those. And I work as a full-time artist. I host a membership program called the Kaleidoscope Mandala Club. We create dot mandalas. We do it every week, and it's a subscription box club, so they get all their supplies in the mail. But anyway, I'm not really here to sell to you today. I'm here to make beautiful things with you. So um, one thing I will mention, and I will put in the comments, I would love a follow on Facebook. If you enjoy the class tonight, I'll put my Facebook address, oops, pointing the wrong way, in there. And that is just the easiest and it's free way to support artists. And so we really appreciate that. I do record the session today. So if you prefer to stay off camera, that is absolutely fine. I do that for people who prefer, maybe they missed the class that they signed up for, or they might want to go back to it later and do it again, change the design. That way I can send it out to everybody. So after we are finished today, I will work on getting it uploaded and I will send everybody a link. Usually that ends up being about an hour after class. But before we get started, here, let me switch. I'm going to get my face off this screen here and I'm going to change to my desk camera. I'm going to unblur this. All right. So for those of you who are not familiar, a mandala is just a set of patterns that start with a single point and kind of expand outward. So we are creating this pearl star design. This was something I did a few years ago, and I'm kind of revisiting it. And it's really simple to do. Before we get started with the actual dotting portion, I'm going to talk about just some dotting basics that if you're new to the world of dot art, will be really helpful to you learning how to do it. So before we get to the actual dotting, what we're going to want to do is get your surface and paint it black. So you'll need a paintbrush for that. And the only thing we're using the paintbrush for is the black background. So whatever surface you're using, I think this is a 4.5-inch wood square, but you can use any surface to dot on. This is actually a dollar store magnet that I painted black and then dotted on. This is just a big flat round thing. Here's a little book that I painted on. So you can really dot on anything, but go ahead and start painting your surface black. And then once that's finished, we'll set this aside and then we'll kind of go over the dotting basics while this is drying. There's no pattern on this, Kathy. It's just wood. There might be like the wood grain. But yeah, I'm working from nothing. We're going to start from scratch today. So there's no pattern on here. All right, so go ahead and work on painting your surface black. While you're doing that, I'm going to talk to you a little bit just about some dotting basics, some good things to know. So go ahead and, when you finish that, just set it aside and let it dry. So a few things. The paint that you use when you're dotting is really important. I shouldn't say the paint itself is important, but the consistency of the paint is fairly important. And so what I like to tell people is that you are aiming for the consistency of melted ice cream or maybe like a milkshake. You want it to be thin enough that it doesn't hold shape. So you can see my paint here. When I dip into it, it doesn't make peaks. It's not super thick. But that's really important. Most often for dotting, I lean towards craft paint. So the paint that you get in these little bottles in the craft section of most stores. I don't use paint that comes in tubes because then I have to worry about thinning it. So like if you have artist grade paint that comes in these tubes, heavy body paint, you can use any type of acrylic paint. Paint is paint is paint, but you want it to be the right consistency so that when you're making your dots, it works out really well. So that's important. So sometimes if your paint sits out too long, it might get a little thicker because the water and the fluid is evaporating from that. You can always add a drip of water to thin it down just a little bit. You don't want it to be too thin because then it will be runny like water and it won't stay in the dot shape. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to put on the screen here. Let's see if I can do this properly. Documents. All right. So when we make our dots and look at the fluidity of the paint here, So this is what I call the kiss. When we're dotting, you want to gently kiss the surface of the surface that you're painting on. So you don't want to smush your dotting tool like you're stamping. We are not stamping. What we want to do is get enough paint on the end of our tool that kind of kisses the surface just a little bit so that it kind of makes that marshmallow, and that's what makes a perfect dot. So it's really hard for me to explain into words. That's why I like to show the picture, because this picture is everything. This is the perfect dot right here. So that's kind of what we're aiming for. And let me stop sharing this one, and I will share this here. Okay. So when we're aiming for a dot, what we're trying to get is this dot at the top. It's smooth, it's round, it's filled with paint evenly. So some common dot mistakes. The first, you'll see that there's ripples, an area of unevenness. It means you don't have enough paint on your tool. You want to have plenty of paint on the tool that you're using, and I'll show you what that looks like before we get started. You don't want to have a peak or mountain, like a little Hershey Kiss. That means your paint is too thick. You don't want it to hold shape. You want it to kind of melt down a little bit. And then if you have areas of unevenness, it looks similar to kind of the first little error up there. It's because you're stamping your tool. You don't want to push down too hard. You just want to push down enough to smush the paint, to let the paint kiss the stone or the surface that you're creating on. So those are kind of just some little tips I think are really helpful. When you dip your tool into the paint, regardless of which tool you use, and there's different kinds, we'll talk about those, you want to make sure that the paint comes up over the edge of the tool. Okay, we don't want to just barely get any paint on there. This won't be enough. Okay, you want to make sure you're over the edge, that you've got plenty of paint. It's going to feel like you're wasting a lot of paint, but in reality, we use very little paint for dotting. I've got some little drips poured out here. That's all I'll need for the entire design. So don't be hesitant with the paint. You want a lot of paint on your tool, and that's true whether you're using this type of tool or this type of tool. You want it to go up over the edge. So as far as tools go, I know not everybody is going to be using the same set of tools, and that's absolutely fine. Most often I will use this set here. This is just a Craft Smart set from Michaels, and it's got a variety of sizes, and I use it for almost everything. But there are sets you can get off Amazon. I've got sets that are made of plastic. I've got a set here. This was a Hobby Lobby set, I think. So there's lots of different sets you can get. And they all work really well. One is not better than the others, but if you pick this up and you decide to do it all the time, you will probably find a set that you love and just stick with. These straight tools here are called rods, and typically they're the same width on both ends. Sometimes the rods that you buy will be slightly curved, like the Craft Smart set I have has just got a slight curve to it. Some are completely flat. Both work really well, but these are called rods. And the tools that you have that have these little metal pieces on the ends are called styluses. And so these were first invented and used for paper tooling, engraving on paper, things like that, but the dot world kind of stole them. Nail artists will use them sometimes. But these are called styluses, and styluses are typically different sizes on different ends. And so it's more important that you kind of use your judgment in the design based on how much room you have to complete the steps. So we're all using slightly different tools and probably different surfaces, but we'll be able to work through this fairly easily. So that we all get a beautiful result regardless of the tools that you use. What else can we talk about? I make my lines most often with chalk. So this is just a normal piece of chalk. I probably got this. This is probably Crayola brand, and I just use a large pencil sharpener and sharpen the end. So I typically will use chalk for my marking, and the reason why I like chalk is because when you make a mark, when you're finished, probably should have waited till my paint was dry, but when you're finished, you can wipe it away. If your paint's not wet, that is. I also will use, dot artists will use a lot of random things to create dots with. So I use a mechanical pencil. I use a pencil eraser for different shaped dots. There are not a lot of variety in the tool options that we have. And so sometimes we have to be a little creative. So don't be afraid to, like, for example, grab the end of a pencil or grab the cap of something to make a larger dot. People do that kind of stuff all the time. All right, let's go ahead, and I think we talked about all the things that we need. You've got your surface, your tools, your chalk. As far as paint colors go, I'm only using the black for the background. And then a majority of my design, I'm going to use a white pearly color. I've got a purple, a light and dark turquoise, and that's it. So I'm going to use 4 colors. Feel free to substitute your colors. You don't have to do the design the exact same colors as I do. There's nothing wrong with that. But the first thing that we're going to want to do is grab your chalk or grab your marking pencil, and we need to find the center of our design. So if you're using a circle, an easy way to do that is to just trace it. So if you trace your circle and cut it out, you'll be able to fold it in half and then fold it in half again and find the center. So that's an easy way to do that. If you're working on a square, it's even easier. So I'm just going to draw lines from corner to corner with my chalk pencil or my chalk. And these lines are going to be dramatically bigger than they have to be. But that makes it easy to see on camera, right? So there's my center. And these 4 lines are going to help me guide my shape in my design as well. Once you have your center and the cross marks, then I'm just going to cut this in half again with the chalk and then cut it in half one more time. So this gives us a nice grid to work from that puts us about center in our design. And then when I'm finished and my paint is completely dry, I can take a wet paper towel and just wipe this chalk away and you won't even know that it's there. So that is the first step here. Now, people will buy stencils. So if you're into dotting, you can get stencils that look like this, and you can just align them and mark on your surface whatever design you want to do. And there's little ones you can get on Amazon. There are silicone stencils that you can buy. There are stencils for rocks that are slightly curved. So there's all kinds of stencils. The most common mandala design, it has 8 arms, multiples of 8, but you can get stencils that come in multiples of 6. There are some that just use, 4, so you can be creative with the design. But with all that stuff being said, it's time to dot. So get your paint out. I just use these little cups to dip my paint in. And then we're going to set our tools out. And then we're going to make our center dot. I'm going to use my pink tool, which is 10 millimeters. And I'm going to use my pearl white paint. And we're going to dip into the paint, make sure it's up over the edge. And we're going to try to center this dot the best we can. Hold your rod straight up and down at a 90-degree angle to the surface. And practice just giving it a kiss and then lifting it up. Jen, that's okay. We don't need to rush. What we did for the next step is we made some lines. So you want to kind of make an X so that it's evenly divided. And then you're going to make a line right down the center and a line left to right. So I often refer to these as my coordinates while we're creating. So north, south, east, and west. And then you kind of have these across as well. And I use the chalk to do that. And then for the first dot, I use my 10 millimeter tool, and I created a dot in the center. Now, if you don't know the millimeters or the measurements of your tools, don't stress about it. This is just you can kind of use your judgment. You just want a dot in the middle, okay? If you make a teeny tiny dot, that's fine. If you make a giant dot, that's fine. Part of the idea of a mandala is that it's a pattern that repeats. So if you do something slightly different than I do, it's absolutely okay. Just do it all the way around. Just repeat the pattern all the way around. No chalk. What can you use? Let me think. If you use a pencil, it will not lift. You would have to paint over it. What could be handy? Maybe what would be a good idea if you don't have chalk available, take some of your black paint and mix just a tiny bit of white into it, so that it's really close to the background color, but not exactly the same. And you can, make your grid lines with that, and that will be not as noticeable. You can use a pencil with this design. I'm not sure you're going to see a lot of it. And then at the end, you can probably paint over any of the lines that you see. Oh, Jen, that's a great question. What did I do with my circle? All right, I'll demonstrate. Sometimes I forget I got to show all the steps. All right, so if you're working with a circle, this is my little circle cheat. And this works with, no matter what size circle you have. So if you have your circle, you're going to cut it out and then fold it in half and then fold it in half again. And that'll give you exactly 1/4 of the circle. And then when you line it up on the edge, it'll tell you where your center is. So usually what I'll do is I'll take my circle, fold it, and I'll just clip that little bit of center out like that with my scissors. And then when I open it, I have my exact center, and then I can just line it up so that it's edge to edge. And then I can make a little mark with my chalk right there where that hole is. So that's my circle cheat. Ooh. Yes, if you sew, you might have chalk, or actually sewing, like if you have a sewing marker that'll wash off. I don't have one of the markers, but I do have a sewing pencil. So this is sewing chalk. This would be good to mark off. If you're, if this is your first time creating, just go ahead and draw the lines. This is just a nice way to learn, and then you can always, repeat it, do it again if you don't like the lines on there when you get a chance, and that's some extra practice. It's hard to find things that will erase off of a surface completely. And so if you have your center dot on there, if you're with me and you have your center dot, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. Is that an option? Do we do those anymore? Recognize hand gestures. It's been a while since I zoomed. Actually, that's not true. I zoom all the time. It's been a while since I've used all the features on Zoom. Oh, I see thumbs up. That's good. Okay. Either way, Kathy, I can see both. All right, so get your center dot. Again, I did that with a 10mm-ish tool. So for the center dot, we want a fairly large dot that we're going to work around. And really the entire first layer we're doing with our white or pearl paint. So we're going to focus on that. We're not going to use colors until we do what we call top dots, and we'll get there. But I'm going to switch to a 6mm tool. So it's significantly smaller than the center dot tool. So just kind of adjust down based on what tools that you have. And I'm going to use white paint. And don't feel like you have to do this along with me. You can see what I'm up to before you do it, if that makes it easier for you. But what I'm going to do, again, I'm going to dip in my paint before every dot. That makes sure that each dot that I have is consistently sized. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create dots around this circle, and I'm going to put them in the blank space. I'm not going to put them on the lines. So I'm going to find my north-south line, and I'm going to put one just to the right of it. Give my dot a little kiss, redip, and then just to the left of it. And then I'm going to repeat that all the way around. So in the blank space, not on the line. Make sure you leave enough room. Don't go too close to your center dot, or otherwise they will overlap. We're going to go all the way around. And mine is super lopsided. So this is a great opportunity for me to show you what I do when I mess up. So these dots here I ended up with really close. So I'm going to remove those just by using a Q-tip and redot those. This is me being a perfectionist. You don't have to do that, but since I'm teaching the class, I figure I better get it right. There we go. One of the things I struggle with while I'm teaching is I tend to look at the screen while I'm working instead of looking at my piece. And so sometimes I lopside stuff up. Kathy, there are a lot of things I cannot do. I'm not a good multitasker. I've done this for years. And so I was also a teacher, so I can read upside down, I can write upside down, I can draw and paint upside down. But if you ask me to do two things at the same time in any other capacity, I am completely clueless. And if you, Jen, you are right. The grid lines can mess things up, but give yourself a little grace. When we're working, we're going to naturally notice those little differences in between the dots. We're going to hyper notice the spacing, and we are going to really stress about being perfect. Anytime that we're working with patterning, our brains pick up on those little accidents. So for example, if I show you this piece here, just at a glance, you're probably not going to notice every imperfection. Because I worked on this piece, I can see everything that I dislike about it. I can see a little crack in the paint here. I can see unevenness. So keep in mind that for dotting, you are going to notice all your little imperfections while you're working. Once you erase the lines, you're not going to see it as much Okay. And when you're finished, you're going to look at the entire piece as a whole. You're not going to notice every little imperfection. So definitely give yourself a little grace while you're working. And I know that sometimes, a lot of times actually, when people sign up for my classes, it's the first time they've ever done it. Don't expect perfection the first time you do something. The first time I make a design or a pattern, sometimes I mess it up or sometimes I don't like it. That's natural. So give yourself a little grace and forgiveness. But when we're dotting, distance is our friend. Remember, you're not going to be looking at it, half a foot away. You're going to be having it displayed on a shelf or up on a wall or wherever you place it, and you're going to see it from a few feet away, and it's going to be gorgeous. And people are going to be like, I can't believe how you did that. So trust the process. All right, for the next step, we're going to do the same thing, but I'm going to go up one row. So if this is our center, this circle is our first row. I'm going to go out one row. I'm going to use the same size tool that I used for this set of 8 dots here. And this time I'm going to go in between the dots. So I'm going to go on the line or in between each one of these with a 6mm dot. So I'm using my 6mm rod and my white or pearl paint, and I'm going to make another row and go right in the middle. And follow that all the way around, and you will end up for 8 of those. You're welcome, Jen. Take your time. Remember, you'll get the recording as well. So if you want to work along with us, you can continue to work along with us, and you'll have the recording to restart if you want to make another one as well. So don't stress about it. All right, for the next step, what we're going to do is on the current row that we're working with, I'm going to place a smaller dot in between each space. So I've got dots on the lines. I'm going to place a smaller dot in between. So I'm going to use my stylus. I've got a green stylus. The large end is about 3mm. So I'm going to dip that in paint. Again, I dip before every dot, and you want it to be up over the ball end. And so in between, I'm going to add a slightly smaller dot in that space. All right, for the next step, we're going to make a teardrop shape, and I'm going to show you how to do it on this surface before I actually do it on my canvas, because I think it's going to be a little easier for you to see. So I'm going to go back to my 6mm tool. That's what we used, not the small dots, but the larger dots next to it. And I'm going to use the white paint, but I'm going to use blue to show you because it'll be easier to see on camera. So how do we make a teardrop? Well, first we're going to use the 6mm tool. You can use any size tool, and I'm going to create a dot. I'm going to make sure this dot's got plenty of paint on it. So this is just a dot, okay? Then I'm gonna grab one of my stylus tools, and I'm gonna find one with a teeny tiny end. If you don't have a teeny tiny end, if you've got a mechanical pencil, you can use the pencil lead. That's really small. If you've got a pen, a a safety pin, a hairpin, anything like that, you can use that as well. But I'm going to use the stylus on the little end. And what you do is you pull the paint down, and then you can kind of adjust the edges so that it looks like a teardrop or a pin. And so in the design, the part of the design that we're doing looks like this. And so this whole process is just the dot here, and then I pull it down in the center with a little pinhead, and you kind of shape it with that same pinhead. Okay, so we're going to make these teardrop shapes. When I do that, I work on them one at a time. So I'm going to show you on my canvas here. So I've got my grid aligned so that I've got my north, south, east, and west, up and down. I'm going to dip into the paint, the white paint. I'm going to leave myself space because I need to pull that teardrop down. I'm going to create a dot. Then I'm going to use my stylus with the itty bitty end, pull that down. Oops. So that makes a little bitty pin. And then I can use that little stylus tip to adjust it into an upside down teardrop shape. I'm going to add one pin on every line. So I'm going to try to use the same spacing. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's the same process on each and every one. You create the dot with the larger tool, the 6mm tool, and then you pull it into the teardrop. And this is the hardest part of this design, so if you can pull this off, you are a pro. You've got it down. So one on each line will end up with 8 all the way around the design. Oh no, Stacy, that's a bummer. I probably should have mentioned that. I didn't even think twice about how canvases are usually not square. To be honest, at this point, I'd probably just go with it and see where it ended up. All right, lovelies, for the next step, I am going to use my 8mm tool. So it's just slightly bigger than the purple tool I've been using for these dots here. I'm going to go up a size, 8mm. I would say an 8 to 10mm tool is perfect for the next step. And in between each of these teardrops in the space, I'm going to dip and dot, a dot in between. So what we want to see in the pattern is kind of a set of 3 dots kind of coming in an array out from that center. So it'll be the center dot in the space and then dot, dot, dot. And we're doing this one in between each of the teardrops. all the way around. So we'll end up with 8 of those. Kathy, that's a great question. Kathy asked, how long does it take for the dots to dry with the right amount of paint? Acrylic paint dries fairly quickly. So there is a little bit of depth to it, especially I'm going to add another layer of color on some of these dots. So it's going to add a little more thickness. I would say safe, if you were in a class in a studio and you were taking it home, safe to take home at the end of class. Don't want to put your fingers in it, but it should be dry to the touch within an hour. And I would say 2 to 3 hours, you'll get completely dry. There are some people in some designs, if you're dotting, that will have several layers of dots. And the more layers you have, the longer it takes. But usually I varnish my pieces the same day that I create them. And so usually it's just a couple hours. I would say a couple hours to be completely safe. To put a second layer of dots, we're going to do that while we're here. So like right now, my center dot, it's starting to get a film over it. So they'll be safe to dot. By the time we get all the way to the edges, we'll be able to go back to the middle and dot again. I'm going to set this to the side for just a second, and I'm going to show you the next step that we're going to do. We're going to do something called walking the dots. And so up until this point, everything that we've done, we dip and dot and dip and dot. And so I'm going to create a dot right here, since we're going to be working around a dot. And we're going to do something called walking the dots. And so I'm going to use a stylus. And this time, I'm not going to redip every time. And what happens when you don't redip is that your dots begin to get smaller with every touch. So that's called walking the dots. And you can do that in a straight line, like you see here. So I've got my stylus, I dip it in paint, and I can walk these dots, and they just get smaller. You can also do it in a curve shape. So I can walk the dots around another shape in a circular pattern. And so that's what we're going to do next. In a design, it looks really complicated, but it's my favorite part of dotting. I love to do this. You can do it. It works best with styluses, but there are dot artists who will do it with the tools as well. But we're going to start ours with the stylus. The first part of the design, I'm just going to take my white paint, and next to each one of these dots that we did in the space, I'm going to create a little dot in the center. I'm using my green stylus. It's 3 millimeters. So we just want a smaller dot there, right next to the big dot we just did. So we're dipping and dotting each time for this, and then we're going to walk the dots. So I'm going to let you all get your center dots, and then I'm going to show you what I do to walk the dots. And walking the dots is a really common design element in dot art. All right, so I've got my 8 center dots, and what I'm going to do is I use the large end of my stylus. I'm going to flip over to the small end. I think my small end might be 2 millimeters. It might be 1.5. I don't care. I'm not going to overthink it. I just want the large dot in the center. I'm going to switch to the small end. I'm going to dip into my paint. Make sure you get plenty of paint up on that stylus, and then I'm going to walk the dots on the side. And so to start, I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I've got 6 dots on there. They get progressively smaller because I didn't dip and dot each time. So I've got 6 on that right side. So I'm going to dip and do the same thing on the left. And I'm going to try to get 6 over there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then that creates kind of they call it a petal. Creates a petal design around that circle. Yeah, Kathy, it looks more complicated than it is. When I first started dotting years ago, I had no idea that people use the tools that they did. I was dotting with acrylic paint markers, and I thought that people switched between marker sizes and made dots I thought they had like a million different sizes. I was really naive. I was talking to my daughter about it the other day because she has a painting I actually did with paint markers and dots in her room. Um, but yeah, it's fun how people come up with these little tricks. And so we're going to walk the dots around each one of these large circles that we did. So repeat that process so that we get 8 of those all the way around. And I'll tell you a little secret. I count my dots like I like to do. If I can fit 5 on one side, I'll do 5 on the other side. But there are times where sometimes I'll just be slightly off and I won't have the same amount. Nobody notices. I'm glad you like it, Beth. I think it's kind of addicting. And for me, it's become very something that calms me down. I like to do it at the end of the day, and it's just kind of mindless patterning almost. So it kind of calms me down, makes me restful before bed. And it is addicting. I know people, once they start dotting, they'll dot on anything. They'll dot on candlesticks, they'll dot on clocks, they dot on wood pieces and books and magnets and all kinds of stuff. So if you're anything like me, you'll go bonkers with it. Oh, Kathy, that would be beautiful to do one on a kitchen table. I do have mandalas on my kitchen table, but I have to be honest, I cheated. They're just stenciled. All right, once you do those all the way around, the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to get a nice big dotting tool. So this one is 12 millimeters. You could use 10 millimeters. Think about the amount of space that you have left. I've got plenty of space on here. If I was working on a smaller piece, I would need to go down a size or 2, okay? Think about what will fit and what will not fit. We still have some part of the pattern to make. So I'm gonna use a large tool because I've got plenty of room, and we're gonna make these large dots that go next to the teardrops. If you need to, it is absolutely okay to use a small tool, okay? If you're gonna go smaller, just use the same tool all the way around. It's not gonna affect how the design turns out for you. It's more important that it fits on your surface. I'm gonna get a little more paint. I'm running low here. All right, so I'm going to use my large tool, and on the line next to every teardrop, I'm going to make a dot. And we're going to go on every line all the way around. Sometimes with these larger tools, you really have to get a lot of paint on there, so don't be shy with your paint. And also a trick while you're working with the larger dots, if you need to change the shape, just like we did with the teardrops, if you need to, you can change the shape with one of these little pieces, one of these little pins on the end of the stylus. You need to perfect your circle. All right, it's starting to be a little more snowflakey. On the ends of each of these dots, we're going to create kind of what I like to call a crown. And so I'm going to go back to my stylus tool. This is my 3mm. Again, judge how much space you have, but I'm going to use the large end of my stylus. And on the ends of these big circles, I'm going to leave basically, well, let me show you what we're doing. There's a set of 3 dots that we're going to put on the end of this triangle, or on the end of this snowflake. So I need 1 in the center and then 2 just underneath it. I like to do my center dot first and then work closer, but you can also do the 2 dots first and then the 3rd dot if you want to. They're just 3 dots the same size on the end of each one. So it's our little triangle of dots that make a crown. Remember to dip and dot every time. Yeah, Jen, definitely. Hold it up and let's see. So you're pretty close to the edge. If you have room, maybe you could do the same thing we did down here instead of building it out into kind of these pointy shapes. Yeah, it looks really good. Um, you could you could do the walking the dots if you can fit another set of dots there. The other thing you could do instead of building it to a point outwards, you could walk the dots from the inside going out so that they get thinner. Let me show you what I mean by that. So for example, I don't know if you can see, on this one, I started, let's say this is my center over here. This is where all my stuff is radiating from. This is the outside going in. You could do dots kind of starting towards the inside and then getting thinner on the way out. So you don't need as much space on the outside. So kind of walk the dots in reverse. Or you could stop the pattern at that part and then resume with the top dots when we get to the top dots. So I wouldn't be scared to just kind of play with it. There's lots of use your creativity and fill in some space however you want to. Whatever you do, as long as you repeat it, it'll look good. So the next step in this snowflake, if you don't, once you have all 3 dots on each, I keep calling it a snowflake. I think I called it a pearl star, um, but it's kind of snowflakey. So I use my large end of the stylus to do the 3 dots. I'm going to flip to the small end of my stylus, and I am going to walk the dots down each side again. So I'm going to start with this one here. Make sure I get enough paint on there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Again, I can fit 6. So I'm going to try to do 6 on each side. And I'm going to repeat that all the way around. The second part of this end of the row design is another row of walking the dots. So I'm going to start this one up at the point, and I'm going to be able to fit more dots because it's slightly longer. So I'm going to use the same tool, and I'm going to walk the dots from the top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I can fit 9. They get relatively small down at the bottom. And I'm going to do that all the way around. So a second layer of that walking the dots. And we're almost at the end of the base of this design. And again, this is one of those things, if you've got space, do it. If you don't have space, don't worry about it. I'm kind of running out of space, but I'll show you what I did on my original here. I just wanted to kind of extend this slightly. So I used the large end of my stylus, my 3mm, and I did 2 dots, 1, 2, and I just kind of put a tip on the end of each petal. So 1, 2, and I don't redip because I want it to get a little bit smaller. 1, 2, and I do that all the way around. Oh my goodness. Every time I pick that up, I make a big clatter. Sorry about that. All right, now the next thing that we're gonna do is called top dots, and I want you to feel free. Oh, no, this rotating thing is not on my supply list. This is just a little cheap, Lazy Susan. I got these off Amazon, um, and so I sneak them. I have a big one for when I do big pieces, so it just rotates, and then I've got a little one when I work on small things, but it just makes it so I can spin. But it's not a requirement, so I didn't want to put it on there because if you don't use, like, what else would you use this for? I don't even know. I think on Amazon in the picture they have it up in your pantry cabinet, but I don't know what you'd put on there that's that tiny. But that's all that is a Lazy Susan. Sometimes it's handy, sometimes it's more trouble than it's worth. But for top dots, the most important thing is you want your bottom layer. It doesn't have to be completely dry, but it needs to be dry enough that there's a film over the edges. So I know my middle dots here are dry enough. The dots that I just created might not be, but there's no rules in art. So you can put your top dots really wherever you want. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to start in the center. Now I made my center dot with a 10mm tool. So when I do my top dot, I want that dot to be smaller. So I'm going to pick maybe my 6mm tool, and we're going to start using colors. I'm going to use my light turquoise paint, and I'm going to put a dot right over the top. And the trick is when you do top dots, they just need to be slightly smaller than the dot underneath so that you can see both layers. I know this is kind of reflective because I use that pearl paint, but um, it's a little bit clearer on this design here. So you can see the center dot and then you can see the white underneath it. So as long as it's smaller, you'll be able to see that. So I added one in the center with my light turquoise. I skipped the next row. And then so on that third, I guess it's the second row from the center, I added dark turquoise and I alternated. I didn't do the little tiny dots. But you can see here where this is where you can make it your own. You can use your own creativity because there's no right or wrong which ones you decide to do and what colors you use. So you can follow my pattern or you can shake it up and do your own. So I've got a light teal top dot, skipped a row. Then on the larger circles, I did a dark teal top dot. And then on the next row, we have these petals. I'm going to add a purple top dot there. And you'll notice as you do these that it really kind of makes your design come alive. And you can do the exact same base over and over again. And just by changing the way you do the top dots, it'll look completely different. Using in this design, I don't have any black, but using the background design sometimes can really change up how it looks too. So if I were to put black on there as top dots, um, that would make it look a little bit different. For these large petals around the edge, I used the light teal. And this is my 8mm. And I used a 12mm white circle, so I'm using 8 for my smaller circles. But you get the idea. Now, if your circles are still wet, wait a little while before you top dot. If you want to speed along the process, you can use a hair dryer. Usually it doesn't take too long. 15 or 20 minutes will kind of get you that coating on the top. Yeah, if your white is not dry, just let it dry. That's probably more important than getting them on there, to be honest. At this point in the game, you've made so many dots, you know how it works. So let that first layer dry and you can add the top dots. There are people who will even go around and add 2, 3, 4 layers of top dots, but you got to let them dry in between. That's a good question, Kim. While I'm dotting, I'll use the wet paper towel or a baby wipe to kind of dry them off. You can see over time they get kind of grimy. Um, on these tools, the easiest way to get this stuff off is isopropyl alcohol, like rubbing alcohol that you can get at the pharmacy. Um, and so sometimes, like I don't clean them off in between every use. I mean, I'll wipe them off as best I can. But if you let the paint build up on there too much, it will change uh, the way that you make the dots. So sometimes you won't get perfect circles if the paint builds up. So I would say, I don't know, maybe between every 4 or 5 pieces that I make, this will start to get kind of grimy and gross. And I'll just put all my tools in a Ziploc bag or a baggie, pour a little isopropyl alcohol in there, shake it up, let it sit for 5 minutes. And then when I take them out and wipe them off, it just comes right off. So the isopropyl alcohol works really well. Um, that's the easiest way to clean them. If I was better about it, I would wipe them off more completely after I use them, but that's just how I am. I'll give it a quick wipe and then deal with it later. But alcohol or alcohol wipes are the best way to get those clean. While you all are finishing, I am going to type my email here in the text box. If you have any questions, if you need anything, you have my email. I will, after the class is over, I need about an hour for processing and upload time, but I will send out the video for this. If you decide down the road you want to get a stencil or you want to try this again, feel free to recreate this over and over. I always tell people you are free to sell anything that you create with my design. So if you create a beautiful piece and you're like, I want to sell this at an art show or a craft show, feel free. If you don't get the video, I will send it. I'm allowed on Michael's. If you registered through Michael's, I don't have your direct email, so I have to send the link through the platform. So that's where you will get that. If you signed up with me directly on my website, I will email you. So that's where you'll find the link to the replay. Other than that, let me make sure. Waiting room. If you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself. But here in a minute or so, if you'd like to share your piece or share where you are on your piece, I'd love to kind of get a class picture. And I'm going to remove my pin. Let's see. I always forget how to do this. View, gallery. All right, so if you are brave enough to share what you're working on, hold it up. I'll give everybody a second. Don't let your arms get too tired. People are hopping on. Kathy, I know you're at work. You can just smile pretty. All right, let's see if I can screenshot this. All right, beautiful. I got a picture. Oh, just had a note. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. Please email me if you have any questions. I do, like I said, I'm not here to sell to you. I really just wanted to create art with you tonight. I do have another class coming up if you're interested. It is on MakerPlace. If you signed up through Michael's, it is on MakerPlace in the classes already. And then for those who signed up on my website, it will be, it is not on my website yet, but that's coming up at the end of September. You've got plenty of time if you're interested. But I'd love to see you all again. And then if you feel like sharing, you can always tag me on Facebook with your picture, or you can email me your picture and I will share on my page. But I'd love to see what everybody creates. And I had a great time, everyone. Oops, I guess I could put my face on instead of you guys talking to a blank screen. Here we are.
Thank you.
Hey. All right. Have a great night, everyone. See you next time.
Thanks again. Bye.